Sure. Thankful for that night. And as I pulled up and I told somebody, I said, it's such a beautiful day. I hope people show back up tonight instead of being outside to enjoy the weather. But the good part is when we leave, it'll still be light out, so we can still enjoy some of that. Yeah, so it's good to be here. Again, just so thankful for being here last night. I was looking at some history of the Indian Methodist Conference. So tonight I want to just talk about some values of Indigenous people, and I'll think about these values and how they relate to a life in the church. I shared last night there's about 572 tribes in this country, each with their own language and culture and history. We talk about how diverse we are, even in this state. Again, remembering that 37 of our tribes moved from California, from New York, eastern side of the country, all over the country to be removed to be here in Indian territory, and so very, very different. The government was, very strategic on some of their moves. Many of our folk, when they arrived here, especially the 5 tribes, they looked for places that were like their home. So the Choctaws in far southeast Oklahoma, Cherokees, the beautiful hills of North Carolina and Tennessee, and other places, the Poncas and Kiowas and others, to find plains, which is places where they loved and used to. But there are also times when the government would put a couple of tribes together with each other who did not like each other historically and fought with the hopes that they would kill each other off. And instead, the tribes learned how to get along to survive and make it work. And so some of the tribes where they're at today, is interesting to know that they made it despite all the attempts of the government to do so many things there for that. So I want to talk about the diversity. So as I travel, being so different, and even having an opportunity of the years to travel to places like Bolivia and Chile, visiting with indigenous peoples there, and everywhere I go across the world and this country, the state, although it's so different, I find 3 things everywhere. Never surprised. I don't even look for it. One is understanding of community, which I'll talk about tonight, what it means for us to be together as indigenous people. The other thing is the importance of hospitality historically from our tribes, going back to the days of Columbus and before. And the last piece, which I'll talk about tomorrow night, is our understanding of relationship. Not just relationship with people that we are related to, but all the people, many who we adopt, vice versa. And for many tribes, their relationship with Mother Earth, with animals, and with the winged ones and the swimmers, all these folk, that many of our tribes still have a deep relationship with, especially the land. And although all of us are not indigenous to Oklahoma except for 2, this is now who we are. And so I find it everywhere. When I, again, traveled to Chile and we visited a Mapuche congregation, one of the big tribes there, it was like being at home. And that native church with the food, and of course when we left, they gave us gifts and everything. Just thankful that we had been there with them to share. And the same was in Bolivia, and so I'm always thankful just to witness that, and to see other people witness that as well. So begin tonight, just a couple pieces that I found, thinking about the long lived understanding of what it means to be together. Shining Arrows in 72 from the Crow tribe said, if you have 100 people together who live together and each one cares for one another, there is one mind. Now, we find this difficult sometimes in the life of the church. I can tell you that as a bishop, but if you think about how we put this together, how we can make things work. And Tecumseh from the Shawnee tribe, hear me, a single twig breaks, but a bundle of twigs is strong. That was part of our litany today, I think, too. This morning. And so what wonderful imagery. Think about collective, how we get along. And indigenous tribes have done this for years and years and years, and not maybe so much with everybody, all the tribes, but for the most part understand what it means to stick together to make it work. And especially for the tribes here in Oklahoma, once we got here, how important it was to stick together, to be of one mind and to work together for the greater good. Now that's a challenge today, and this state of Oklahoma, 39 tribes, each with different interests, big tribes, the small tribes who aren't always crazy about the big tribes because of what they got, the land and the rest, and vice versa. But for the most part, when we know folk got to stick together, they stick together for that. A couple of photos from thinking about community, and was sharing with somebody this morning about anywhere we go, whether with the tribal gatherings such as this powwow or church or whatever, how intergenerational we are for that. That's an easy piece for Indigenous peoples. And here at the Ponca powwow, I think Jesse, a couple of years ago, we were there, and my communications person who got these great photos, they're all ages being together to celebrate for that. I think about Acts chapter 42, and I think about what it means for us to be together in community. You had these passages just lately, I think, in the life of the church, the formation of this early church and what that was like. This passage, Acts 2, verse 42. The believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the community, to their shared meals and their prayers. A sense of awe came over everyone. God performed many wonders and sights among the apostles. All the believers were united and shared everything. They would sell pieces of property and possessions and distribute the proceeds to anyone who needed them. And every day they met together in the temple. They met together in the temple and ate in their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. They praised God and demonstrated God's goodness to everyone. And the Lord added to their community all those who were being saved. I think about that in relation, as I talked about the tribes and how we operate, and as I always look at parallels for our lives as Indigenous people and how they relate to the Gospels there with that. So for Indigenous people around the world, there is never a me or a singular in what we do in this world. You know, this modern day society says, look out for number one, take care of yourselves, and the rest. But Indigenous people have always known this world's far more bigger than just ourselves. So when decisions are made in tribal communities, which is still true today, it is for the good of all people. I shared this morning about the 7 generations concept of how we look ahead in 7 generations for what's best for the people. So while the dominant society says look out for number one, our communities look out for the good of everyone. I think back to 2019 when COVID hit, and if you recall, so many people were searching for the vaccine, just couldn't get them, and the tribes had an allotment. Every tribe got so many allotments of the COVID, of the vaccine. And once the tribes vaccinated their own people, they began to vaccinate everybody. I have so many colleagues who said, I would not have made it had it not been for the tribes who allowed folks to come and be vaccinated there in their tribal communities. For that, we did a vaccination clinic at what used to be Mayfair. Now it's Mosaic. It's I think it's a UCC congregation, and partnered with the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe there, and 2 or 3 times. And first time we did it, it was all natives. And then the next time it was everybody. And the amazing thing, when we were there was a woman from the Hispanic community, probably in her mid-80s, didn't speak any English, was there, and I saw through an interpreter, the nurse talking to her. She was worried about getting vaccinated. Would somebody find out about her, undocumented and the rest? And they asked no questions. Her daughter got her in there, got her vaccinated. She was down the road. And that's what I think about in terms of how much we cared for the lives of all people, even when the tribes, with Cherokee Nation or Osage Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, this area, when they do things, fixing roads and bridges, that's just not for the tribal citizens, for all of us. And that's how we understand how we do so much together in this world for that. So throughout history, you know, my research and the rest has shown us that decisions with Indigenous tribes has always been made with the entire community in mind. Even in this modern context, as I've talked about, we care for all people, inside and outside the tribe, the village, and the nation. The Chickasaw Nation does a wonderful job. They have one of the best PR firms around. I think it's one of them in the city. And they talk about the work they do and how it benefits everybody. I love to watch those advertisements and know a lot of people there. And it's just wonderful to be able to see that. So when you think about that concept of looking out for everybody, it includes how we care for one another, each other's needs, how we take care of the environment, which I'll share a little bit later, looking ahead to the future in mind. Before, actually, when we first got to Indian Territory, but before that, for Native communities, there were no fences. There were no blocks. Nobody knew who owned what, unless it was around fighting for buffalo. Then it might have got dicey a bit from time to time, territorial. But other than that, everything was shared with everyone for that. That confused the early settlers and folk who got here. They weren't used to that. Folk weren't used to that. So when our ancestors came to Oklahoma through removal, they were given various acres of land, which we'll talk about here in a second. And it didn't mean much to them for that. Didn't understand this concept of what it meant to own land and what it meant to segregate others off of that. So they continue as they had, and unfortunately, there were so many scrupulous folk who found ways to take the land. And so one of the ways that the government, I talked about this a little bit last night, they said, look at this great land. Tribes aren't using it. It's going unused. It's just out there. And why aren't they developing it? Why aren't there cities, towns, and the rest? And so they began to find ways, again, how can we get our hold of this land? And so they, in order to assimilate indigenous people, they started the Dawes Act here, authorized the president to divide reservation land into individual allotments. So they started this way, usually about 160 acres for families, 80 for unmarried adults, 40 for children, and they even set aside some acreages for native cemeteries. That's why you see so many cemeteries around the state of Oklahoma for that. But only those who accepted the allotments would later become United States citizens. That's another, I got all kinds of side stories. That's another story for itself down the road for that. And then the government sold the remaining land to non-natives. So think about the land run and other places. My Cheyenne big sister, Dr. Henrietta Mann, talks about her mother being in Cheyenne country with very few neighbors, and the next day she wakes up and she has 250,000 neighbors who came into the land run. She said she didn't know what to think of that, having no concept what it meant to own land or where they happened to be at. So, but here's what happened as a result of the Dawes Act there. Resulted in the loss of about 90 million acres of land. 90 million acres of land because of that. The act destroyed Native American cultural, social customs around the country. Native folk forced to live apart from their nations because you were given territory in all kinds of places. The act diminished tribal holdings and economic sufficiency. Also made it difficult, ironic, for our ancestors to access traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering sites. That's still happening today, of course, there with our present government as well for the state of Oklahoma, where they happen to be. But the main piece, I talked about how important community is for us, was to break up the communities, a land that was held in common for all people. That was their intent. They said this, ironic, and they talk about the 5 tribes being quote unquote uncivilized, because we want to share everything that we have and don't want to put fences around and the rest for that. And in certain parts of the country, if you travel up north, the Dakotas is still the very same way in terms of people wanting to share everything that they have with other people. And to make sure I stick with my script tonight for that. I realized last night I didn't when I got back for that. So I wanted to share this piece because it's, again, such an important piece to think about who we are and what we do. Some of you are familiar with the late Angie DeVoe. I taught at Oklahoma City University, served on the trustees, worked with President Robert Henry. She was his favorite. Boy, he loved her writings and teachings. Quoted her books and the rest. Some of you may be familiar with it. PBS did a series on her probably in the 90s before she passed away. So if you find it, you need to check it out. The name of her book is, they have it up there, And Still the Waters Run. And Still the Waters Run. That was the promise the government gave to the tribe. That's how long the treaties will be in place, land and the rest, as long as the waters run. And of course, the waters are still running. All this stuff is still going on for that. But Angie wrote about the countless ways that people in the state, how they took property from indigenous folk, and really a lot of that around oil, which we'll talk about in a minute, of course, with another piece for that. And because of her book and other books that she wrote, she was really outcast from so many places, from writers and organizations and companies, because she spoke the truth. So when I read her book years ago, she wrote about folk in Muskogee, long-standing, prominent people in the state, and talked about how they got the money. I thought, wow. After that, I said, no wonder folks are mad at her for going to tell the truth about what happened. If you travel to the state capitol, which is another great day visit, there's a beautiful portrait of her in the state capitol talking about the work that she did. But she was one who had the courage, energy, and just a wherewithal to tell people about here's what really happened to indigenous people. Talked about the many times that folk took advantage of them and got the oil and the rest. Bacon College is a place I grew up with for some time, and it's very sad to see it's closed. My brothers and I were there often for basketball games, and the Moreau Indian Children's Home, which is still there, run by the American Baptists. It's around the corner from Bacon. We spent a lot of time out there, and Dr. Tash Smith, who wrote a book, Capture These Indians for the Lord, talked about first name is Cashman, last name is Barnett. He's one of the richest Muskogee Creek people around. One of the most richest Indians in the world because he had oil on his land. And so part of it was, which we'll talk about for Killers of the Flower Moon, if you were a full-blooded Indian, folks didn't think you had the knowledge and understanding to take care of yourself. Could you make good financial decisions and the rest? So they appointed guardians. So you can imagine, just like with the other book, the guardians often were not good people. So they found ways to get the money from these folk. Tried to have him declared incompetent. He married a white woman later who took him off to California, and little by little found ways to get his money for that. Now part of this in his deeds, somehow the Presbyterian, I think it's Presbyterians, got some of his money. The Methodist Church was mad, not because of what was happening. They was mad because they didn't get a fair cut of the money they had. It wasn't theirs in the first place. So again, talk about the ways that even the church found ways to take advantage of these Native people in that day and age. So I think about Angie, some of those people that she writes about, and the rest. And Barnett, when Bacon was opened, there's a Barnett Hall named in honor of him for that there in Muskogee for that. Now, of course, almost infamous for this area, Killers of the Flower Moon. How many of you seen the movie or read the book? So I figured. When it first came out, I was so excited. I'd be traveling on the plane and see people reading that book. And then, of course, the movie came out. What a powerful story in the life of this church. My mother was here this morning for a bit, and when we were growing up, she would tell us stories about the Osage Mafia. Had no idea what she was talking about. Didn't always pay attention. Luckily now we do, and would tell us about what was going on and the rest. It wasn't until the book came out that so many people began to understand what was going on. For those who haven't, it's the movie was done in 2023, produced and directed by Martin Scorsese. Never can pronounce his name. Based on the 2017 book by author David Gran, set in the 1920s in Oklahoma. Talks about the series of murders of Osage people in relationships in the Osage Nation after oil was discovered on tribal land. The tribal members still had maintained mineral rights, but the corrupt people who sought ways to find the wealth. My mother was a good friend. There's Molly, the main character in the show, Molly. Her son, his daughter, that was good friends with my mother. They lived near White Oak, Bonita, Oklahoma. Many of you may know the area. And talked about running around, going to powwows and dances. And she would tell me, she would say about once a month, her friend would get money, all kinds of money, and they go shopping. She'd share in the rest and all of that. And growing up in Bonita, her mother and others fascinated Bonita's Cherokee country. When they'd have parades or powwows, and Osage people would come in the cars, and she said they had the most beautiful blankets, Pendleton blankets there. And so she vividly recalls those stories, but speaks fondly about her friendship with Molly's granddaughter there, and her other great-granddaughter who works for the Cherokee Nation, friends with my family as well. So when you watch the movie, read the book, what's ironic, I think, if my history is right, that land was first belonged to the Cherokee Nation. And then the Cherokees, I think, couldn't get along with the folk, and so Osage ended up in the area, and per capita became the wealthiest people in this country at that time. And people didn't like it. Thinking about the Osage people who really, not that folk were not smart, but many who really had no idea what money meant and how much wealth that meant for what they could get and do. And so you see in the movies, they lose a car, breaks down, they just go back to the store, buy a brand new vehicle, and usually the dealers would charge them twice as much as it cost, but they had no idea. They didn't care. No idea. I mean, all kinds of money. And so again, for the Osage people, if you're full blood or a little bit more, almost full blood, you probably had a guardian. If you were half, maybe quarter, they figured you could take care of yourself for that. And this was the way that the guardians, if you watch the movie and the book, when they go to the grocery store, or if they had to call their guardian and say, hey, can I have this new blanket? Can I have this new car? Whatever. And they had to say yay or nay, whether they could have that or not. So think about that. These folk with all kinds of money, and you still have to go with somebody who's non-native to ask for permission. And so you can imagine how much money was taken away from the Osage people during that particular time, what was happening there in this story. So I shared that again just to illustrate that the wealth that so many tribes had in this country, not used to that value, not used to this way of life of Americans, and just wanted to go and be amongst themselves. And some of the most poignant pieces of that book and movie are when the people get to gather together in community for birthdays and celebrations, ceremonies. That was still is today, the ideal time for our tribal people when we get together to be in community. Someone asked last night about our native churches, and that's one of our big pieces, is just to be in community with people like ourselves on special occasions for that. That becomes so very, very important who we are. So that's what I think about that when I think about this particular piece in our life and the ramifications of what people still deal with today for that. Philippians 2:4, care about them as much as you care about yourselves, and think the same way that Jesus Christ thought. What a wonderful passage, again, thinking about what Scriptures calls us to do and who they call us to be. You know, I talked about Indigenous people having the same thought, and when I think my second year there, I get out as much as I can across Kansas and Nebraska. In the winter, I stay close to Topeka. You don't go to Nebraska in the winter. Sometimes I can get to Lincoln, which is 2 hours, and I'm okay. Although this year Topeka had, one week we had 14 inches of snow. Nebraska had none. So don't venture out too far. And so I was having dinner with some pastors there, Korean clergy who invited us for dinner, Korean folk, myself, and we began to share our commonalities of who we are, our values and our thoughts, and began to talk about our work in Kenya and the values, of course, that Kenyans do, very closely related to Indigenous peoples. Of course, many in Kenya are Indigenous people, of course, for that. And so I heard this story years ago. Most of us have probably used it in sermon illustrations for that. It's a story of a missionary who's in Africa, and the kids are having foot races, and so he's going to offer prizes whoever finishes first, second, and third there. And so they take off, and one of the kids falls down, and rather than passing him up, they all come back to help him out. And then they hold hands, walk into the finish line. The missionary was surprised. He said, how am I supposed to give anybody that prize? You all came in together. And they said, this is just who we are. And so I said, Ann, is that story correct? She said, it is. Many of us have used it. I said, is that story correct? She said, it is. So she began to talk about this concept of Ubuntu. Many of us have heard that there. And she says it means a humanness that is found in being with the other person. That's what that means. When one pulls away from others and individualistic endeavors that are self-focused, they lose the essence of what it means to be human. The life-giving force that is found in the interwovenness of life experiences with each other. And because of Ubuntu, she said the message of love in Africa has been preached with ease and great effectiveness as it resonates with the inner being of most people. I love that piece because she's right about the kids who were looking out for each other and not to be number one. And so I really appreciate her hearing that. And so every time we get to be together, we talk about these commonalities, who we are, and how that defines who we are as human beings a great place for us to think about what that means for us in the life of the church. Yeah. So how many of you have seen Reservation Dogs? Again, I figured a good number here too. Filmed here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was an FX series there. It lasted 3 seasons, and it's so exciting for Native peoples across the country. It came on a Wednesday morning, and so many of my friends, younger ones, would wait till midnight to watch that series. And then we're going to post all of the social media, fill in the lines, everything for us, so you really couldn't pay attention if you wanted to watch it after that. It was, FX described it as a comedy, but it was more perhaps than that. Produced by an all-indigenous crew, something that really has never happened before. Writers, everything. Indigenous people so resonated with that show because it was who we are. We laugh, carry on because it was so real for us in that particular piece. And I believe they used the parking lot here at Boston Avenue. And I think maybe a fellowship hall there. And I was so thankful. I happened to be here on a Sunday. David Wiggs was here. And David used it as a sermon illustration, some part of the show. And I was jealous. I said, he beat me to using that show for a sermon illustration. I was mad at him for a bit. But thankful for his inclusion. I just happened to be here on the day that he preached and included Reservation Dogs. But so thankful for Boston Avenue allowing that to happen here in the life of this church. This film, if you haven't seen it, is based, again, here in Oklahoma, filmed in Tulsa and Okmulgee. 4 young natives who've lost their best friend, Daniel, to suicide. So they spend the season reflecting upon life and relationships, exploring their future. It's a total, genuine movie. From the perspective of many of us for that. Indigenous people around the country relate to this when it talks about home, life, religion, stories, relationships, and more. So even for myself, I was working with Rock the Native Vote. I still am a bit today, which is a voter registration effort in this state, founded back in 2002 or 4. And so we were setting up for voter registration everywhere. And so I think Osage had a powwow last night, Sovereignty Symposium. So some of the folk who find places happened to be there, and we were set up. Tulsa folk was set up. And so they said, hey, can you guys send us your stuff? We're doing this scene where it's a trade show, and these are set up, and we'd like to do that. And so we sent it to them. Then they said, if a couple of you want to come and be in it, you're welcome to do that. And so myself and Walila Knight, who is here in Tulsa, she runs the Tulsa chapter there, went and did that. So got up about 3:30 in the morning. I lived in Oklahoma City at the time. Got here at 5:30. You sign up, and you sit and wait. And about 8:30, they come and say, you, and you. And they put us in the scene. One little scene probably lasted 10 seconds. Took us about 2 hours to record for that. And then we get to the scene where we're in the hallway with our booths and the rest. And so that was my, I think it was 7 seconds of fame. You really had to pay attention to see me in the show. But it's funny because that night at midnight, I remember I was traveling. And my phone people began to text me at midnight. Like I think I'm up at midnight. And tell me, hey, we just saw your piece. So then I had to get up, turn it on, and watch it myself. But that was fun to do that. So they're all day long, and I think we left at 4:30, and I was tired, went out. I don't think I got to eat. Then they had the nerve to say, who else going to stay for the next show? I said, I'm out of here. I got to go to work after that. But you will be glad to know I got a check for $135 for that. And I hope I won't need it since this might be my last job. But to put it on my resume, support actor on my resume there. Don't you think it's a good idea, Dr. Biggs, to do that? And I got to find my check stub so I can frame that, put it in my office. Just impressed. Young folks love that because they've all seen it, so they're quite impressed for that together. But I should have, because during the very last scene, the show is set at Big Casita United Methodist Church. Some of our folk here from there have been there. And they're at a funeral for a longtime friend, for their spiritual advisor. And they're there and they're viewing the body. For Native tribes, when we have funerals, these are not short deals. I remember Dr. Biggs talking to us about funerals when I was in the course, about what to do and not to do. And I said, that ain't going to fly in our native churches. I didn't tell him that. I just went along and did that. So in some of the churches, the body shows up at night. Family members will sit up with the body all night long. You're there, and people come and go. People you haven't seen for years, and they come and you tell stories, and you visit, you laugh, you cry, and you have a good experience. So in this show, and even at Big City, I believe, they dig their own graves. The church members come. There's people who do that. Literally get that done, and then the church is so close to the cemetery, they just walk the casket over to the cemetery there. And so they did all of that. They enjoyed traditional foods like we did tonight. Dug the grave. It was a legitimate episode because everybody came together, whether they were closely related to that person or not, because that's what community does. They came to support each other and to be with each other. Their folk came back that they hadn't seen for 20 years, and that's just the way the community happens to go for that. Whatever was needed was given, was shared. Those that had not been spoken to anyone for years showed up. Young ones listened to elders as they told stories about the person and about life and what you do, why you do what you do. Folks worked together in the kitchen to prepare meals and the rest. So I share that story because for myself, that's what community is for our Indigenous peoples. We share, we pull ourselves together and make things happen where they happen to be. On the right is Cheese. So he was my favorite actor. He's now a student at University of Oklahoma, and so he was one of our celebrities to record a video for Rock the Native Vote. We appreciate him because he's one of those and said, can you help us out? And he did help us out there after that, get together. So my next piece I want to talk about is what it means, the hospitality. Hospitality has been a basic trait of Indigenous people for so long, since time immemorial. Indigenous people around the world show the hospitality through their presence and through their gifts, showing great joy and giving. History will show us, it even goes back to Christopher Columbus, and there the hospitality did not go well after that. I think I had this here. Again, a couple of places in the Great Plains of our gift giving here. So Native American hospitality, and we look at historically, going back, distinguished from charity, was a cardinal principle in every Indian tribe, and this is around the world, folks. Narrative of many early pioneers, explorers, DeSoto, Coronado, Columbus, John Smith, and the Pilgrims down to the most recent period, full of instances of wholesale hospitality toward the white strangers, sometimes at considerable cost for that. So my friend Thomas, Reverend Dr. Thomas Whitefoot Bassett wrote a book years ago for United Women, and at the time he's not Methodist Women's Studies, Giving Our Hearts Away. So I'm going to remember that book. We studied that, probably goes back about 15 years. And he wrote, the name of his book is The Giveaway. But he wrote about hospitality, and he shared this story about Columbus, and I had to find it to research that. And this is a letter Columbus wrote back to those who are funding his trip. He says, at every point when I landed and succeeded in talking to them, talking about the natives of the islands, I gave some of them everything I had, cloth, many other things, without receiving anything in return. But they were hopelessly timid people. It is true that since they have gained more confidence and are losing their fear, they are so unsuspicious and so generous with what they possess that no one who had not seen it would not believe it. In this piece, they never refuse anything they ask for. They even offer it themselves and show so much love that they would give away their very hearts. He would end up taking, for those that he didn't kill, end up taking many of the natives back to his homelands. And not sure what happened to slaves and the rest. So literally, he did get the hearts for that. I found this very, the words to think about why he wrote that was so very true. Because so many were killed and decimated during his time. And so when we talk about the hospitality of Native people, it often did not go well for that. And the same was true for looking at the period of Big Oil, Killer's Flower Moon, Angie DeVoe, all those places for that. I love this piece. Has anyone read Braided Sweetgrass? I think it's a wonderful book. If whoever does book studies in this church, you got to find it. Braided Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a member of the citizen band Potawatomi, lives out of state, and been a wonderful book. There she talks about plants and what we learn from plants and so much. But you got to check it out. And I think there's even a book for young adults as well. And she may have a second book out by now. And I love this quote because it's so true, and I see it in so many places. When she writes, "Wealth among traditional people is measured by having enough to give away." And it's amazing, and I've seen it time after time after time in my life in the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference and with Indigenous folk from all over, just to see where that's at, and for folk who understand what that means. Some of you recognize this one picture up here, there, my good friend Sam Powers. We think about what it means for us to give away. Jesse and so many others come from tribes and cultures that are big on giving things away. So all sorts of places. This photo was right after my election. Dr. Joe Harris, former communications director, sits into the Bishop of Oklahoma, and Sam Powers was very instrumental with getting me elected. And I knew that early on. I mean, even back in 2012 when I first began to run, I would sit with them, and the two of them were so helpful. And so after I was elected, I had to present this to them, an expression of just my gratitude for who they are and what they did for me. So this was in Houston, I believe, Sam, when we did that. And so for Indigenous people, when we celebrate occasions, special like funerals, weddings, birthdays, instead of receiving, we give away. We give away gifts for different people and for special occasions such as this, for that. Items given away to family. Often for Oklahoma, it's Pendleton blankets. If I was up north among the Dakotas, it'd be star quilts, whatever it happened to be, dance shawls for women. Been to so many funerals, and this isn't always true for Eastern tribes, but for Western, Northern tribes and others, we see this. And so I mentioned for most of our tribes, we have a wake service that would be all night long. And then for the Ponca people, my Ponca relatives, talked about Jesse earlier as well, my relative. 2 wake services, the funeral's held on the 3rd day, and then it's a feast. And so much like Cookson did tonight, they'll bring tons of food out to feed the entire folk. I mean, they bring big pots of corn soup and fried bread and the rest. And their goal is to make sure that everybody has all that they would need for that. When my predecessor in Oklahoma passed away, Reverend Dr. Thomas Ruppe Sr., man, there was a huge crowd. I mean, he knew every Indian that side of the state anyway, big in the United Methodist Church. I think about 500 people were at the feast at least. Jesse would have been a youngster then. Probably don't remember that. For that. And so the family takes great care of making sure they get to recognize everybody there, the best meal, gifts given to people who come to visit, longtime friends, people who've helped the family, so forth and so forth. I presided at the funeral that day, but was at the feast. There must have been at least 50 Pendleton blankets given away. And it's not, the family doesn't have to buy all those, so tribal members from everywhere will come with blankets and shawls to give to the family and say, here's this that you need to take care of the people for that. And so all that jewelry and the rest, it's a great honor for folks to receive, for us to give and for folks to receive for that particular time. Even on birthdays or the celebrations, the family invites you to come and have a meal with us and be with us to help celebrate what's going on, oftentimes giving away gifts from place to place for that. And I found this practice again around the world when I visit with indigenous communities and even among the folk in Alaska as we think about that. This understanding of giving away is so biblical. That's who we are. But I got to share this. Randy McCurdy, who's with this, will know some of this. The potlatch, which is, many people call that here, but it's really for Alaska, Northwest tribes, Canada, other places. It's historic. And so for centuries, the potlatch for the Northwestern coastal peoples had done the very same thing. People gather at various times of the year, and they use this potlatch for giving away for a variety of reasons, recognizing the loss of loved ones. Listen to this: settling disputes, recognizing and maintaining relationship. And so again, the people bring the best that they have from the family, invite everyone from the clan, from the tribe, and they come for dancing, for food, and for fellowship. They give away all that they have. A time of gathering, maintaining spiritual balance, affirming ties with the ancestors, and a celebration of the gifts. So when the early missionaries came, they didn't know what to think about this piece, and they didn't like it. So about 70 years, get this potlatch, you're giving away to people food and the rest, was legally banned in Canada. 70 years. Also in Alaska, Oregon, and Washington State, suppressed by missionaries and civil authorities. So if they caught you doing it, they would take your regalia, and often for those who dance, you have regalia passed down from generation to generation, special meaning, and the rest, it would be seized. In some cases, it would be burnt in front of the families if they caught that. Some potlatch participants were even sent to prison because of that. But it survived. Like many of our religions and ceremonies, you go underground to have people find that. So the potlatch is where core teachings of honor, love, and respect and sharing are exemplified. Where traditions that hold the fabric of a culture together are reinforced. And Bill James, who was working with the Lemhi tribe and from the area, said, "This is the glue that has kept our culture together," the potlatch. He said later, talking about that. So thinking about the early missionaries, he said, to give away everything that you had, that's not right. And you think about the Gospels, what Christ asked us to do, what we're asked to give away and to share with other people. So I think about the hospitality of the potlatch, and again, the understanding for what that means for us. How we are to stay connected as human beings. We think about the hospitality we offer in the life of the church, and I want to say thank you to Boston Avenue for the hospitality you've offered me, relatives and friends, as we've gathered here today for the last 2 days. I have to tell you that, usually I'll stand out when I go to visit churches in Nebraska and Kansas. If I'm not preaching, I don't always tell people I'm showing up. Sometimes I don't know where I'm going to that morning. And so I surprise people for that. Those who've been at it for a while, it's no big deal. They're used to it. But for some of the youngsters, they get a bit shell-shocked when the bishop walks into the room and sits in the front row. And I'm just going to hear people preach, to meet people and to visit that. But also, a while back, I went to one of our churches in Topeka. It's my last Sunday before I left in December, and the pastor, new pastor who I'm looking forward to hearing, went and sat down, front row. Not a single person came to speak to me. And everybody was looking. Finally, a woman came over. She said, "I know I have to know you." And she said, "Oh, you're our bishop." And then everybody came over to see me for that. So there are times when the hospitality is not afforded in our churches, especially when strangers come. But thank you, Boston Avenue, for the hospitality you've extended to so many people. So I think about what that means, and I talk about what that means, and not just for Boston Avenue, but for the churches we represent, what it means for us to understand what community means for our churches. It's not just about taking care of who's in this setting and in our gathering, but again, as we think about for Indigenous people, how we care for the whole world. Our community is so broad and so wide who we happen to be. The hospitality, again, that we talked about, that we offer to help people understand our inclusive nature in the life of the church. So thankful for 2024 General Conference for the actions of what it means to go beyond even offering hospitality. For all people to know we're an inclusive church and we love everyone. All folks are created in the image of God. Sam and myself and so many others were so shocked and so surprised at the 2024 General Conference, how quickly things happen. The first piece we passed around inclusivity, set up there with the Council of Bishops, the first time to be there. And those bishops didn't always pay much attention either to what's going on. I noticed. Not that I did. And so the first piece passed, and it was so easy, and I turned to Bishop Kokanya, Minerva Kokanya sitting with me. I said, "Did that just pass?" And it did. And it went so quickly. And again, for us to affirm who we are as God's people, and what a blessing that was to stop and do that, for understand hospitality. And then tomorrow night we'll talk about our understanding of relationship with one another, with the world and our communities, and who it is that God calls us to be in our lives. With that, my friends, it's been a joy to be able to share with you tonight. I do want to stop and pause for questions and comments folks might have about these two. And then tomorrow night, I'll share, I sent to Sam, I've used a lot of text and resources. I did send to Sam my bibliography that I've used often for most of what I've shared last night tonight. and some other books. So if there are, again, book clubs, others that want to check out these books, it's a wonderful text. Get to read. And also included in there, which we'll talk about tomorrow, 4 or 5 places that are connected to what I've talked about, that Boston Avenue group that's going out this week. I think you go out once a month to a site that you want to go check out, some in your area, some in your not, some great day trips. Places I've taken groups to often that you might want to do the same throughout the summer, spring, or whenever that happens to be. And of course, the first, including now one of my favorites in the state, the First Americans Museum. How many have been to First Americans Museum? Thought so good. Your favorite? It's a wonderful place, and I got to tell the story real quick, and then I'll ask for questions or comments. When in the early 90s, I was in Oklahoma City, and there was an authority that kind of ran the museum before it was getting formed. The late Senator Kelly Haney, who's United Methodist, became a member at Norman First American when I was a pastor there. Probably the most famous Native person in the state. I really worked to get the museum built, working with Congress and the rest. And at the time, he was in Congress. Got some bills passed, he and some others, and then the legislator turned. And it's because that many have an idea that the tribes are so wealthy. Now, there are some in the state that are very wealthy for that. And so they said, we don't need to be paying for that. The tribes need to be paying for that. So it took an act of legislation for it to pass. So I knew the staff, they worked down on Broadway, not too far from where I stayed. And the first one it passed, and the second one, fighting going on, and the vote failed. And I knew how much time these folk had put into working on this. I went by to see them. They were sad, crying, and the rest, and we would stop and ask for prayers. Folks, I did that for 4 or 5 years. I would watch and pay attention. Every time it failed, I went to see them and prayed with them and supported them and encouraged them. And then finally it passed. I said, I'm for sure going to see them today. So I went to see them. We were happy, and again had prayer with them. And so I had felt like I've been a part of this First American Museum since its beginning, seeing the struggles they had to get where it is today, that tells amazing stories, plural, of the tribes in the state. So well done. Chickasaw also built the water park and other pieces around the hotel, has added so much more attention to that place. So it's a wonderful adventure, spring, summer, wherever you happen to be after that. It's the truth, yes. A museum created by Indigenous peoples telling our story rather than somebody else telling our story. That's one of the beautiful things about that. So had to share that and get that plug in. I'm not on the payroll either, by the way, after that. But just so appreciate the people who are there and know their struggles. So I'm going to stop for a time. We've got some time, I think, Sam, for some questions and comments. Are there from folks? Yes, sir.
If I could, I'm curious about whether the denomination or you have thoughts or position on the idea of so many of our churches, particularly here at Oklahoma, that actually sit on land that's Indigenous land, and the process of acknowledging that. Your thoughts about that?
Thank you. There, of course, besides the 81, Margaret, I think, churches in... Oh, I'm sorry, I was asking the question about so many of our churches that sit on Indigenous land across the state of Oklahoma, and what are thoughts on how we acknowledge that. Think about, Margaret, 81 native churches, United Methodists in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, but so many of your churches, and especially in this area, sit on what was once tribal land. I think about Shakota, Eufaula, Muskogee, all these kinds of places for that. And there's some piece that folk do a piece about acknowledging that history and how they acquired the land. And people do these land acknowledgments. But we also talk about how we take that a step further and working with the tribes or the churches, native churches in the area, to recognize that and say, how can we support one another? Especially when many of the churches in the Oklahoma Conference are much financially, other ways, better shape than some of our native churches are. And for that. And there are places, too, where, and Oklahoma's done some, when churches close, Joe Harris, former bishop, would call me and say, hey, we got these churches closing. Can the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference use those? And some of those we've taken the land back. Waletka, Oklahoma, a beautiful little church, just closed in the Muskogee Creek Nation, and it's become an OMC church for probably the last 10 or 12 years. So there's many places where that's happened. In my conference, in the Great Plains Conference, we have a Granter Chapel near Kansas City, when the band of, I think if it's the Shawnees or another group, were removed to Kansas City and then removed again, there's a handful that stayed. They said, we're not going. And the deal usually is if you don't go, you become you're no longer a tribal member. You're a member of that, I want to say this, but you're just a plain old American after that. And so that was their church. Their ancestors are buried there. It was a church of many places. It closed. And so my conference is even given this, it's not a tribe, but this group of folk, Lenape, so it's the Lenape tribe, about $200,000 to fix the church up to reclaim that place. So we're looking to do that this fall. And there's many other conferences who have done that, who churches have closed or in the process and they deed it back to the tribe. And so that's a good start for that. Oklahoma's done some of that as well. Not deed back to the tribes, but to Indian Missionary Conference for that. Yeah, but good question. I appreciate that. A lot of work to be done on that. Other questions, comments from folks? Yes, Randy.
Bishop, this church has hosted annual conference.
Yes, hosting this summer, I think. Yeah.
What that looks like. Could you describe how the OMC conference gathering differs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, when the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference gathers, it's much like what I said earlier. It's about community, relationship, and hospitality. So there's 3 sites, one at Preston, near Anadarko, and Antlers, Oklahoma. Campgrounds, and so when they meet, many of you have been there, they meet outside. Dr. Biggs has preached there, others have preached there. Meet outside. Sam's been there many, many times. In the second week in June, and under an open tabernacle. And then we've got camp houses that surround it, and so throughout the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the churches feed meals to everybody. I mean, you don't pay nothing. You go and show up as part of our hospitality. I had a superintendent in West Oklahoma. He was new to the cabinet. And he was at one, he said, David, I need to give them something. I said, no, you don't. I said, don't you dare give them anything. They're going to be offended. I said, this is their gift to you to come and enjoy this meal and to be a part of that. But when they come, when we come to the annual conference, there's about, at the time, 3 people who are worried about the business. It's me and the bishop and the treasurer. The rest could care less. They come to see one another. They come to fellowship. They come to eat. They come to worship. That's all they care about. After that, and lately, the last several years, starts on a Friday. It's about 90 degrees. By the time it ends, it's about 100 degrees, and so we get through those quickly. And when your father was here, Mr. Solomon, he made us wear suits out there in the summers. You need to talk to him. Talk to him about that. We followed the leader. He wore his 3-piece suits to the conference, and so we all wore suits. We remember that. There, and so now it's like the Great Plains Conference. They come in shorts and T-shirts and now if you come in shorts and T-shirts, one of the elders is going to pull you aside and say, if it's a pastor, saying you don't need to dress like that. You're a pastor. They'll still tell you that. They did that to me years and years ago as a youngster, and I paid attention to that. But 3 or 4 days, it's such a different setting. Probably the only conference in the United Methodist Church outside of Africa who still do that in this country, but just a great place to be at. I will have to confess, in the Great Plains, we're in an air-conditioned building, and so I was in an air-conditioned building my first year, and I texted a few people in OMC during their conference to let them know I was in an air-conditioned building. They didn't like that too much. But I had to tell them because I said, boy, this is nice to be inside and not in the heat. Although I was used to that, getting it together. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. I want to recognize a few folk who are with us tonight. Reverend Margaret Johnson, Margaret in the back. Margaret is assistant to the bishop for the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. Welcome. A member of the Mississippi Band of Choctaws, where Choctaw people originally come from, and then Reverend Mike Sweetalk over here. Kiowa, who's outgoing superintendent for this district, I believe. So good to see you, Mike. Good to see you. And then others who are here, but I saw them and just wanted to recognize them this evening. It's good to see them. Some of these folk I haven't seen since I left. So it's fun to see people last night and today. So it's good to see folk. Well, folks, again, thank you for your time. It's been a joy to be here tonight. Again, tomorrow night we'll be in the sanctuary, Sam, and I'll be talking about what it means for us to be in relationship, what that looks like for Indigenous folk, and what that means for us in the life of the church. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed it. Family, all my family and friends who came this morning had a wonderful time, sent me text. Powerful services this morning. Cherokee Choir did amazing, as always, there, and the folk just appreciated being here, the spirit in which you were present, and just the chance to worship together with one another. Thank you, my friends. Appreciate it.